Welcome back, everybody. Another episode of Expanding the Zone. I'm Shayne Combs of SVC Sports Zone, here with my brother Matt. And, Matt, I guess I should start this week by making a little bit of an announcement that maybe people have read online, especially a lot of our local listeners. SVCSportsZone.com over the last 13 years has obviously covered the Side Valley Conference. And, now as we move forward, SVC Sports Zone's not going anywhere, but we are going to kind of chop off the .com. And my SVC Sports Talk partner in crime, John Bruce, is going to kind of do some things to continue into year 14 with the website coverage. As many people know, as I've talked about leadership, I'm taking an assistant principal position at Paint Valley. And, long story short, just with a lot of time and different responsibilities and so forth, I want to continue to grow the YouTube channel and do some features and cover kids. But that website coverage, John's going to start to take over. And, I'm excited about that, Matt, because what we're doing here on Expanding the Zone, those of you that listen to us through your podcast app, be it Spotify, iHeart, iTunes, all wherever you get yours, we're out there. I would encourage you to also take a look at us on the YouTube channel, just because there's different things we do. Our biggest feature here in the preseason of football coverage, I just had a chance to go down, talk to head coach Tyler Gallion of the Piketon football program and view their beautiful facilities. And you can see some of those things on our YouTube channel. So again, that YouTube channel is SVC Sports Zone Shayne. And again, some coverage I think you'll really enjoy if you like high school sports. So, Matt, back to the business at hand here, expanding the zone as we get back at it this week. I think we have a really neat topic that's going to talk a little bit about, some sports topics throughout the entire world, as we always like to do, but they really do kind of apply to the high school. And I'll just kind of throw it over to you and kind of let you explain to the fans what you have in mind this week.
Shayne, we've always said this show's driven a little bit by what we see out in the world of sports or whatever, and it kind of brings things to mind that we can tie in a little bit to the high school level that we deal with. But recently, there's been some stuff happen with just overall what we feel like maybe you could call game management. Just the overall process of managing a game or whatever. We had a situation a few weeks ago in the Nationals Padres baseball game where there was a shooting outside the stadium. I'm sure you remember that. And it was, obviously a scary situation. And we had I just saw on Twitter today, there was a fight at the Dodgers game last night in the crowd, people throwing stuff and people a section had to be cleared out. Had a friend go to the Cubs-Reds game the other day, and there was a fight out in the left field stands. And they didn't even bother to really talk about that on TV, but he was at the game and saw it. So you're seeing some of these things like that happen. And then it even got us thinking, Shayne, as you and I were talking about that, other game management issues, whether it be behavior of players, right? Behavior. Well, we talked about behavior of fans just now, but behavior of players, behavior of coaches, whose responsibility is it to help in some of these areas? We saw some situations like with Javi Baez the other night, against the Reds when he hit what basically was a walk-off sacrifice fly and, went into this full out, taunting type of thing because of a history he had with the pitcher, the Reds. And it led us, you and I, to talking about what crosses a line. Where does celebration become taunting, so to speak? Where does this thing? What's acceptable? What's not? Who makes that decision?
Well, I guess with the biggest high school connection I can make, Matt, right off the bat that we should probably throw out there is this is kind of relevant to the sport and to the culture of that sport. And I guess, the way I would describe that to people is when you think of game management, you think of the culture of a sport, you think of the rules of the sport, just imagine all the different sporting events you go to and the different atmosphere and some of the different things in terms of space between the playing field or court compared to the crowd. Um, what's acceptable in the celebration and some of those different things. So, for example, like if you're at a football game, you think about how far you are away from the action in comparison to how close you are in many instances in terms of like in a basketball game. Think about the size of the crowd and the crowd noise at a football game in relation to, say, a regular season, at least high school volleyball game, or maybe a girls basketball game, maybe a non-league game where the crowd's not as big. Um, all of those different
Right.
things come into play. I think most officials would tell you that game management, or most administrators would tell you game management. So the first thing that comes to my mind is when I think of the atmosphere, and then I move into the rules part of that game in terms of, it's a little bit more acceptable to maybe break into a team celebration, say in volleyball, in comparison to if your team has a 3-point play and they all circle up down on the baseline and do a dance. That's probably going to have a little bit more,
Right.
you
Right.
know,
Right.
you know, uh,
Yeah.
issues that officials have to deal with. So I guess that's where I would start in terms of what's your opinion on all of those factors in terms of how close fans are to the action, and then the different rules and the different cultures, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable within the sport.
Yeah. You really mentioned a couple things there. I want to try to unpack a little bit, Shade. I mean, one, uh, first of all, we talk about the crowd. Let's talk about the crowd for a minute. Um, the crowd control issues. Okay. So at a high school game, typically, let's be honest, it's really a players, coaches, everybody's in somewhat of a vulnerable situation when it comes to the crowd. Because if you think about it, there's not there you have some big crowds from time to time, right? I mean, football, basketball, you get some good crowds. And really, let's face it, most schools are going to try to provide a couple deputies, maybe one or two security people, from maybe the sheriff's department or whatever. And and then what, a high school principal, and those two or three people are expected to police, in some cases, 800 people in a gym or 2,000 people at a football field or whatever. So if you think about it, it can really put you in sort of a scary situation. I know last year we started to run into situations where some some fans followed officials to the parking lot. Now, not when I say we, that didn't happen, thank God, at our school. But our assigner for our league had mentioned to us that it was happening in other areas of Southern Ohio. It had happened a couple times, and he was reaching out to schools for us to try to get out ahead of it and think, okay, where can we park these guys to where they're walking out a back door to where nobody sees them, or can we dress them in a different spot, because we're trying to be proactive and get out ahead of not letting those things happen. And in this particular case, it was happening in basketball, which goes to your point a little bit of basketball tends to be one of those emotional sports because a lot of people in a tight space, fans right down on the floor, basically, right? I mean, eh, the fans are probably closer to the action in basketball than they are any other sport, probably, and basketball and volleyball, but basketball tends to have bigger crowds. So it becomes really, really heated. We've talked on this show before in the state of the game of basketball, the physicality, and people lose they get emotional, and all these things are feeding into this, right? And whose job is it to try to manage that? I think that you mentioned sort of the culture of the sports. In basketball, for instance, it's acceptable in some places for student sections to be right down close to the floor. We have a team in our league. Uh, I'm not going to name their name on here, but anybody that knows me is going to know who I'm talking about. We have a team in our league that basically, in my mind, violates an OHSA bylaw, which says you're not allowed to stand on the floor. They have a student section behind the backboard. Instead of standing in front of or on the first bleacher, they stand about 15 feet in front of that bleacher so that they're about 3 feet off the baseline. I mean, they're literally about 3 feet off the baseline, maybe 3 to 5 feet. Compare that to football. You just mentioned the culture. Now all of a sudden your fans are further away. there's a level of physicality obviously that's expected, and so people don't get too worked up about that. If you do argue a call with an official, you're kind of yelling from 100 miles away, oh come on, and it's over with. It just doesn't seem like it spurs the same type of thing. You coach baseball, Shayne. Look again, a part of the culture of the sport is you're out there, and I don't know about at your school, but there's times where there might not be an administrator even at the game. There's not going to be security at the game. I guarantee you that. And you're out there coaching. Is it all of a sudden your responsibility if something happens in the stands to run out there and, oh, wait, wait, let's stop it? You see what I'm saying? All this. I know I've given you kind of a long answer, but there are real concerns and vulnerabilities, I think, at the high school level when it comes to this game management.
Well, let me just do it this way then, because you've had a chance over your career to wear so many hats in this. I think maybe the most interesting way to go about this for the listeners is how about I give you a particular job, and you kind of tell me where you think their line starts and where their line ends in terms of the responsibility. And I guess maybe the easy answer is that we're all working together to kind of to put the product on and to have a safe environment for the kids and the fans and all involved.
Right.
But I think it might be just an interesting way to go. So I'll just start down through a list I have here, and you tell me kind of where you think. And I'll start with an easy one because it's one that you've done for a long time. What's the responsibility of the coach on game night when it comes to game management and making sure that, well, I'll just stop there. Just kind of making sure that the game takes place and goes about in the proper manner.
I think ideally that really the only thing the coach should be concerned about on game night in terms of game management is really his or her own behaviors and their players' behaviors. Because for me, I don't see how we could ask a coach to really take on any further level of game management than that. And I think what's unfortunate, and you may be able to answer this with the spring sport angle. I feel like we do with our spring sports sometimes put some of those responsibilities on our coaches, whether it be, baseball, softball, track, because again, we just don't have the same approach to let's make sure we have an administrator at every game. Let's make sure we have at least one policeman at every game, right? We don't do those things for those sports. So sometimes I think maybe you guys have to wear different hats, but to me, I don't know. I'd like to know your opinion on it, but for me, I don't see where we can ask a coach much beyond his or her players and themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the spring sport, sometimes throughout the day, you play a little grounds crew, a little maintenance. You probably do play a little athletic administration. In terms of getting your field ready. I know some coaches they don't want people. They're control freaks. They don't want
Right.
people on their field. They want
Right.
it in a certain way. So there's that dynamic too. You're not going to hurt my feelings if you go out and pick up a rake. I mean,
Right.
but it's one of those situations of you get to the game. A lot of times there's a greeting of umpires and there's different things. And as you said, now in fairness to some athletic directors and different things there, where it's different is you may have a baseball and softball field, even if it's on the same site, hundreds of yards away, or it may not even be at the same place.
Right.
So there's a dynamic there. So there's certainly some things in the spring that maybe, obviously a football coach maybe not deal with, because again, on a football Friday night, there's going to be a lot more attention to detail and a lot
Right.
more, that's just culture. That's just, and I think as a spring coach, you know what you sign up for. I think people like myself that have done this for 2 decades now, you kind of know, again, what you sign up for and you're okay with it. Maybe some people that rubs them the wrong way and it goes. So I think that's an interesting point you make there, even
Right.
in the coaching aspect from sport to sport. The next thing on my list, I guess, would be officials. You obviously play a role. I'll get the athletic director here in a second, but as in terms of the officials, at what point, I know what the rule book says, but in your mind, in terms of game management, at what point should the umpires, the officials, the referees be involved in taking over the event, running the event, and then in your mind, when does their evening end?
Yeah. So with officials, I feel like beyond just the obvious, okay, which is the game itself, right? And trying to help manage some of those player behaviors at times. But I want to come back to that later when we talk about what we should and shouldn't allow players to do. I think let's leave that for a minute. But
Sure.
officials help manage that a little bit. I think the one thing uh, that I think maybe officials could do, and I don't know. It'd be interesting. I've never asked our assigner about this, but I feel like at times officials maybe should play, and maybe they're not even allowed to do this, Shane, but play more of a role in when they look around a gymnasium before a game and they say, wait a minute here, that example I just used at that school in our league that allows their students to basically stand a few feet off the baseline. I feel like those officials could look and say, hey, listen, because because this school, the particular school says, well, we have bleachers there. We have a right for people to sit in those bleachers. I totally agree. But the problem is you're standing 10 feet in front of the bleachers, not right in front of the bleachers. And I guess what I'm saying is if I'm an official and I look at that and I say, wait a minute here, how many different things could this lead to? Right? Kid goes in for a layup, gets fouled, goes into the crowd, kid from the other school kicks him while he's on the ground, fight breaks out, right? Who knows? I mean, wouldn't you as an official look at that and say, that worries me? And that's one more thing I have to worry about. So I'd like to take care of that before the game starts. Go over there and say, listen, we're not playing this game till these people back up. They have to be back in front of this bleacher. You'll see things like that, I guess, because you do see officials, they'll go around and they'll check facilities for safety issues. Like at a football game, there was one night I forgot to put a line on the sideline where the coach's box is, and they made me go out there at 20 minutes till the game, grab my sprayer real quick, boom, knock it out. So they're checking things like that. How about checking some things that might lead to some situations we don't want? You know what I'm saying? And then I think beyond that, um, I think it's the official's role probably to try to not throw gas on the fire, toward an end of a game. If it's been chippy, hey, let's get out of here and let's move on. I know we had a situation a few years ago where in a 25-point game with a player standing at half court holding the ball under his arm, letting the clock run out, an official blew the whistle and kicked a guy out on the front row for saying something. There's 20 seconds left at that point. Can we get out of there? You know what I mean? It was the seventh person they'd ejected from the crowd that night. You know, let's let that one go and let's all go home. So I think the officials probably, that's the only thing they can probably do is maybe some preventative stuff before the game. And again, I'd have to ask officials what they are and aren't allowed to do. I would think that an official has every right to say, hey, we're not going to play this game with these people standing on the floor right here. I don't know, maybe not. But some preventative stuff like that, I think maybe they could do, uh, to help a little bit.
Well, the last one I'll combine some groups because I don't want to make the segment too long. I just thought it was a good organizational piece in the show,
Right.
especially with all the different experiences you've had. Let's move to one of your current roles now in terms of athletic administrator. I'll even lump in just the overall administration of a hosting school, a visiting school, however you kind of want to go about it. But when you get into these things, and again, there's a difference probably between a random non-league junior high game on a Monday night and a huge varsity rivalry on a Friday night. I get that,
Right.
but take me through the responsibilities of the administrator. Beyond the normal schedule this, schedule that. I'm talking about like once the teams are there ready to play, game management wise, what are you administering in your mind?
Yeah, this is a good question too because again, you're one person and you're trying to kind of oversee a lot of different things. Unless you're lucky enough to also have maybe an assistant or another administrator there, or two or three security people, whatever. But I think honestly, just like I said about the officials, there's a certain level of preventative that an administrator needs to do, whether it be, like I said earlier, we're not going to let our student section stand on the floor. we're going to make sure that they stand in the first row of bleachers so that we kind of keep them off the floor a little bit. We're going to make sure that we constantly remind people, whether it be in the crowd or whatever, if there's situations where poor sportsmanship is shown, we try to go address that a little bit, maybe subtly or whatever. I've seen certain athletic directors. I've never had to do this, thank goodness, but I've seen certain athletic directors go sit right in front of a fan who's just throwing a royal fit during the game, just to almost kind of subtly say, hey, I'm going to sit here and listen, and you got to be careful what you say because I'm right here. Whatever those preventative things. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I do think it is the responsibility of administration to provide a safe entry and exit for officials. I think it is, a dressing room that people can't just come running into all of a sudden. Don't make them park right out front of the school where everybody's going to, make them walk. Try to, and that gets into facilities sometimes, though, doesn't it? With old schools, especially some of these older, smaller schools, they may not have, I mean, they literally may have like not an extra room for them to change and whatever. We're pretty fortunate with the setup of our school that we can sort of route these guys out the back way where not a lot of people are. So that, I think, administration-wise, Shayne, would be the responsibility.
Well, we're moving right along, and I've kind of tried to stair step this to make the most sense. I guess what you're leading into is a little bit of fan behavior. The fan behavior I wanted to touch on was student sections, and I wanted to tell a story that kind of goes back in the opening tonight, Matt. I mentioned SVC Sports Zone, and our first, oh gosh, I don't remember what it was, probably first 5 years of existence, we had a neat thing going where we kind of had some student section competitions. You'll know back in our playing days, Matt, the student sections used to be pretty intense, right? They used to be pretty
Right.
big. Obviously,
Right.
We grew up in a time where, I think we've joked on the show before where, once upon a time, things that were a little bit, creative, maybe not so much nowadays, and it makes people nervous and so forth. Well, on that note, we got to a point where I kind of got the impression that some of the local administrators were a little bit nervous. They felt like kids were trying to take it over the top a little bit, and we kind of didn't want to have our name associated with that, or be viewed by the schools. We were starting up. We were fairly new there in the first 4 or 5 years. We obviously needed the support of the schools to be successful in our access in terms of promoting kids and promoting programs. So we kind of backed off. But I will say that for 2 or 3 years, we had 2 or 3 schools in our league that their student sections were off the charts. And I think by year 3 or 4, every school you went to had a student section of some kind, and that was really neat. But the problem was it started to make people nervous. And I wondered your thoughts. You've already talked a little bit about rules of where you stand, how you stand, what you say, what can happen. Where do you stand on student sections today in comparison to 20 years ago? You're an athletic director. If you're a coach over there, I assume you kind of like having a great student section at your home game. If you're an athletic director, can a student section make you nervous? Do you go into certain environments when you know you're there as an administrator with a little bit more of an edge? I don't know about that. Or just talk to me a little bit about, we talked fan behavior. Talk to me about student section behavior in the role that it does, or what, maybe what you wish it could play in terms of the game itself.
I probably have a little bit of a different view on this than a lot of administrators. I think I'm going to be honest with you. I think we live in a society where we worry a lot about upsetting other people. Okay. And look, I'm not talking about bullying or doing things just outwardly to be mean to others and things like that. I'm not talking about that. I don't like that stuff either. But what I'm talking about is, if something scares us at all, we almost just want to do away with it, and I think that if we're not careful with student sections, what we've done at times is we've really pinched school spirit a lot. They're already in today's society, and we've talked about this, I think, a little bit before, and I don't want to get off on another tangent, but for different reasons, there's a bit of lack of school spirit compared to what there used to be. People aren't as maybe loyal or attached to their school, right? And I think that with student sections, I think that we as adults have really hurt those because we got to a point where we wanted these student sections not to say anything, not to do anything, just sit there and clap their hands, when you make a good play. And you've got a big group of a bunch of teenagers up there. The level of maturity we expect from them is not realistic. And I think for me, rather than to pinch that, to take it away, for me, I think that we need to encourage more school spirit and more people in there, and not worry so much about the other team being a little bit upset at something that you say or do every now and then. Now, with that being said, I think there has to be some parameters. I think that for me, it's an easy rule of thumb is just like, look, don't make personal comments to a player. I mean, don't make a reference that singles out a guy from the other team. Um, I don't want to get into details, but over the years, you've seen some things like, oh gosh, that crosses a line there. Maybe there's a a comment about an ethnicity, or there's a comment, and you're like, come on, you can't go there with that. I think if student sections don't make it personal, I'm pretty much okay with it. Don't attack officials. There's probably no place for that. But if a student section is getting loud and rowdy and they're into the game, and let's just say they boo a call a little bit. Is that the end of the world? I don't think so, probably. Is it the end of the world if a kid shoots an air ball and they yell air ball? No, I mean, that's just part of it, right? I mean, those things happen. I can tell you growing up, you can ask those kind folks over at Zane Trace. There's more than one thing coming out of a student section to me once or twice. You learn to deal with it a little bit, but I think that as administrators, I think that if you get a big group and just, oh man, what could happen? What could happen? Again, let's not just throw it out. Let's try to teach these kids what is and isn't acceptable. For me, Shayne, it's just, as long as it's not personal, I'm okay with most of what student sections do. I don't know what your take on it is, but that's kind of the way I feel about it.
Well, I certainly think that's the case in terms of, there's a line of attacking the other team or attacking, particular players on the other team for sure. If you're cheering for your team, or if you're just cheering, aggressively or excited or loud or whatever it may be, again, I think there's a lot worse things high school kids could be involved in on Friday night. I'm with you.
Oh,
I would like to teach them how to do it, and encourage them to be there more and more and more. And I guess that same line of thinking is how I would go into my comments about players on the court or on the field. I go back to our coaching responsibility. You said we're responsible for our behavior, and then we're responsible for our players' behavior. Well, as I try to teach what we refer to in our baseball program is our PACT values, our pride, attitude, class, talent. We try to talk about these things, and really teach along the lines of how we want to conduct ourselves. And one of the biggest non-negotiables is we never ever encounter anything negative or anything that can perceive to be negative with the opponent. And that's a really big one. And I think when I look at something that, I'll give you a quick example in the sports world right now with the Olympics. I was watching beach volleyball the other night, and it was intense. They were getting into the to the round of 16, and winner goes on, loser's done, and there was a joust at the net and a really intense play and so forth, and the girl started jawing across the net at her. You could hear it right on the TV.
Yeah.
And the official said, absolutely not, keep it on your side. So it goes back to that culture of the sport. Even though it's encouraged to do whatever on your side, there's still that line of you don't do it across the net at the opponent. And for me, Matt, I think that's probably where I stand in terms of where am I okay, where am I, oh, I don't like that. It's what is genuine celebration with your team in comparison to taunting or throwing it at the other team. I'll see kids sometimes when they have a 3-point play, or you'll see kids, get a big RBI double in the 6th inning to break a tie game. Well, they're going to be excited. They're
Right.
16 years old. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
if they have like a little thing they do with their dugout and it's toward their dugout or whatever, within reason, sure. But it doesn't, I think going back to like the whole Reds Cubs thing throughout the year is it became obviously at the other team. It became at the opponent. And then that's when it starts to really hit on the integrity of the game and so forth. I think that's where it bothers people. Um,
Let me
so
ask you
I
this,
guess
Shane. Like,
in
does
short, it would be celebration versus taunting.
yeah. Yeah, let me ask you this. So, okay, and I agree 100% with that. I think the celebration versus taunting is the right way to look at it, But sometimes those lines get blurred a little bit, don't they? I mean, take a sport like baseball. As a coach, okay, you just mentioned that kid gets a big hit, or let's say a kid you know, hits a 2-run homer to take the lead in the top of the 7th or whatever, and when he crosses home plate, everybody's out of the dugout, they're chest bumping, they're celebrating, they're hugging each other up. Okay. Like you said, that's probably acceptable. You're not really doing anything to the other team. It's in your dugout. What about like a kid, that same kid, when he hits that 2-run homer, as soon as it leaves his bat, he knows it's gone, gives it a bat flip, looks into his own dugout and kind of says something, and then slowly starts jogging to first. What's your, as a baseball coach? I know at the high school level you don't have a ton of home runs, but like what I'm saying is like the bat flipping, the things like that. Where do you go with that? I mean, have those discussions ever happened in your program? Or
Well, my first reaction in all seriousness was, I don't know how many kids I've coached that you hit the no doubters where they just, they swing and all that ball's way out of here. But but no, I do think what you're talking about is probably a higher level baseball thing in terms of the home run and bat flip. But there's still a situation in terms of that reaction during live play. I think that kind of goes back to each their own. I know in our program we really talk about never during the live play. So like in
right,
basketball, in baseball, whatever it is, when the ball is live or when the game is being played, we should be doing nothing but playing the game the right way and as hard as we possibly can for one another. Now,
right,
when the ball goes dead, that's where the discussion starts to play. And let's face it, there's a lot more downtime in baseball and so forth. But, you know, in terms of a pitcher with a reaction after a
yeah,
strikeout in a high school game, you'll see that a lot in an intense spot. Again, if it's genuine and it's to yourself and it's not at the opponent, then yeah, I think that's okay. It goes back to, I'll even go as far, I understand there's certain celebrations that are premeditated where people have the different handshakes and the different things or whatever, you know. Again, what's the line? Again, I think the line is, does it delay the game? Does it bring attention, negative attention to the opponent, so forth? If it's a positive celebration with your own, then that's fine. And like we said earlier, in volleyball, it's encouraged. That's the norm of the game. They come
right,
together, celebrate, boom. But even in volleyball, I would argue that it's what, a 3 to 5 second huddle up, go.
right,
It's that type of thing. Like a lot of times with football, there's different things. Well, there's a play clock starting, and there's different things, and there's consequences in place. So there's certain rules there that kind of, hey, let's go. What happens on the touchdown?
right,
Now you're in a little bit more of a dead ball situation. Yeah, you got a point after and so forth, but you got a little bit more downtime. So to me, it goes back to careful with the premeditated stuff that it doesn't cross the line. But I can always go back to stay consistent in my values in terms of never in the live ball ever. That's out. But then in terms
yeah,
of when it comes to the dead ball situation, keep it in house, keep it together, keep it celebration to you and your own, and never ever encourage. And I think that's coaches included. I think sometimes I think sometimes I even see colleagues over the years cross the line of like, if I ever disagreed with another team or anything, it's not for me to ever say anything to an opposing player or anything like that. And I think sometimes
Right.
that's where, again, as adults, you have to go up and beyond the student athlete behavior and make sure that you're doing it the right way yourself.
Yeah, I was sitting here taking notes when you said that. It's funny, just as you were saying that, we were thinking along the same lines because I put down genuine versus choreographed. That reaction that is a genuine emotional, like, yes, okay, like for instance, kid hits a three. All right. And as soon as he hits a big three, he turns around and kind of hits his chest one time and like, yeah, let's go. Okay, that to me is a natural like, but when he turns and he shoots the bow and arrow up in the sky as he's running down the floor, that to me is idiotic. I just to me that's choreographed, that's thought of beforehand, and to me too, I think sometimes these celebrations, Shane, and maybe this is a weird look at it, but like I can live with celebrations more when you're celebrating someone else rather than yourself too.
Mm,
So like the bench in basketball. I can't remember what
yeah.
college it was, man. If I wish I could because you got to look it up sometimes. But there was
No,
a
it's great.
small college that had all these choreographed bench celebrations. You remember
Yes.
that stuff? Like they'd be over there
Yeah.
on the bench and they would. And to me, okay, so that's choreographed. But I thought it was in good fun because one, if you think about it, the other bench can't see your bench, so you're not really rubbing your opponent's nose in it because you're on the same side of the floor, right? So you can't see it. And two, you're sitting the bench, so you're not cheering for yourself. You're cheering for the guy out there that's making a great play, and you're engaged in the game. So like I was all for that. That's why sometimes I get a little upset with an official when they run by our bench after we make a big shot and sit down, sit down, sit down. Now I understand if they stand up for a whole trip or two. Well, you can't do that. But don't you feel like sometimes we ask kids as administrators and as officials, we want kids to act like they have the maturity of a 35-year-old NBA veteran or a 35-year-old NFL veteran. I stand down on the football field, Shane, every night, every Friday night. I just happen to stand by one of the end zones because that's just where I stand. I don't know why, but that's just kind of where I hang out. And I'll see touchdowns scored. And as soon as that touchdown scored, man, I'm talking as soon as it's scored, the officials are corralling it. You know what I mean? Like, here, give me the ball, give me the ball, give me the ball. You go over there, you go over there. There's hardly any time at all for a celebration whatsoever. Kid just scored a touchdown. Let them enjoy it for a second. Let them hug each other up a little bit, hit each other on the helmet. You're not taunting the other team. I'm not saying that you're taking your Sharpie out and signing the football like T.O. used to do. I'm not even saying that you're spiking it. I'm just saying, like, let guys get together for a minute and celebrate. But so for me, I think when it's a genuine reaction like that amongst your own teammates, not directed at the other team, I just don't think there's anything wrong with that. I really don't. I think where it gets crazy is when, like you said, when it starts to be directed to the opponent.
Well, I think we're missing a valuable opportunity to really highlight kids doing a positive thing in terms of think about what you just said. The kid's not in the game. How many kids sit over on
Yeah.
the bench and be like, "This is dumb, I should be playing, coach doesn't know," it's one of
Yeah.
those
Right.
things.
Pouting around.
Like one of my favorite things in sports, I always try to highlight it on film work, is the reaction of the others. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there's a big non-negotiable in terms of basketball, in terms of, you got a teammate on the floor at a dead ball, you got to sprint to him and help him up. You know what I mean? It's one of those things, like when
Right.
I see a kid get the and one, a lot of times what I love is to see the emotional reaction of the kid trailing the play, or the kid who, that
Right.
maybe wasn't even involved. There was a cool thing last night in the Olympics. I can't remember the event. I want to say it was the women's 800, where the USA runner, won the event. And, she was obviously exhausted and extremely proud of herself, as she should be. But you could tell that she looked up at the scoreboard and her teammate had come from way behind to win the bronze. And you could tell that she was genuinely excited for her teammate that she also medaled. You see what I'm saying? It was one of those where
Right.
it's kind of a cool thing the way it happened, because I just think, Matt, that we're missing the boat in terms of teaching kids what it means to be a great teammate, to be excited, to make it more about something a little bit bigger than yourself, and so forth. So I think we're missing some
Right.
opportunities to really teach there. Yeah, Matt, as I look down my list here, I've kind of checked all the different things. I don't want to cut you off. Is there anything I'm missing before we go into final thoughts?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered, the different people involved in game management, the different situations that arise. I know, there's some of these things seem like they're way different, but in a way they all sort of tie together in terms, we felt like, in terms of the overall game management itself. So no, yeah, I think we covered most of it.
Well, I'll kind of get us started here in terms of the final thought. I mean, for me, the final thought is that we all really, really believe in competition. We all really, really believe in what it does for student athletes. I think we would all agree that kids are better off being a part of something after the final bell. So I think we all
Right.
share in a responsibility. Maybe we don't all agree. Maybe you're listening to this and you're ready to throw your computer, up against the wall, or your phone out if you're listening to the podcast on the car or whatever. But I think where we can agree is, as coaches, as parents, as fans, as players, as officials, as athletic directors, principals, we all share in the same common goal of, hey, we think this is really, really important. So I guess what I would encourage everybody to do is to jump on board and all play a part in making it successful, right? Making it available,
Right.
making it, as we move forward, making it better. Because I think we all agree. I think we have a lot of positives that I see sports bringing high school. I think media is growing. I think kids' opportunity to public speak and to handle themselves in the public eye, and to do all these different things. I think there's so much growth that sports is allowing us to have. I think we all share in that responsibility, Matt. So that would be the simplicity of my message here. I always try to take a professional development, common, thought or overall summary from myself. And I think that's what I come away with from the show. Maybe a final thought from you, and I'll close this out.
I think we can't try to just take emotion completely out of it. Fans are going to be emotional. Coaches, players are going to be emotional. There's a place for that. And honestly, if you think about it, that emotion is what makes sports great. Some of your best sports memory is the celebration after a great play, right? Or, you see something, even just see a great play and you see people's reaction to it. That, to me, there's nothing wrong with that. I think what we have to do is, instead of trying to curtail emotion, in other words, instead of trying to not have a student section, let's say, we've got to try to have proper emotion. Not like the thing toward an opponent or taunting, but true, genuine, um, non-choreographed celebration with your own teammates, with your own people, that not intended to show up the other team or show up the opponent, but just intended to celebrate each other. I think there's something to be said for celebrating other people. You need in life to learn how to appreciate others and to do that and to support. And I think sports teaches that lesson. So I think that's the biggest thing I took from all this is, let's not try to take the emotion out of the game. Let's just try to make sure the emotion is channeled in the right direction.
Well, really well said, and I think the show, the timing of it was perfect. Is we're coming up on the eve of a fall season that's going to have us, pretty much in a gym or at a field probably 5, 6 nights a week, and I think we all agree that we
Right.
wouldn't have it any other way. So I think that's well said. I think it's a well-timed show. Just want to throw a couple things out in closing. I appreciate Dr. Chris Goodenshaw-Pathy's support of what SVC Sports Zone's doing. I know he's got a cool sports announcement coming up here in the near future. I think it's going to be really exciting for fans. And so again, I just wanted to give him a shout out. I appreciate him. And Matt, obviously we have some ideas for upcoming show topics that we were just sharing with each other off the air. But anytime someone has one for us, they can look us up on social media. Again, SVC Sports Zone's not going anywhere. Still have our Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Feel free to let us know. So Matt, on that note, we're going to get on out of here. and a great show. Look forward to a fun, safe fall season, and we'll come back at you on Expanding the Zone again next week. Thanks, everyone.